Welcome to episode 5 of Civil War Breakfast Club. I'm your co-host Mary, and joining me is my co-host Darren.
Hello, Mary. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
How's everything going? Have a good weekend?
Awesome. I did. Thank you. Very good. Our
Very good
Facebook
weekend.
Live went very well on Sunday.
Facebook Live was a lot of fun. Anybody who would participate in that, we really appreciate. It was a good topic. We had some good fun with the football.
We did.
Watched some halfway decent football over the weekend. And that was pretty cool. But
Yeah,
it's
go
good
Pats.
to go Pats. I know, definitely. Even your Packers won, right?
Yeah, they did. Yeah, they did.
Pats and Pack won.
Yep.
Life cannot be bad when both the Patriots and the Packers win.
Exactly. And we are both obviously drinking beer tonight. So what are you drinking, Darren?
Shocker. I am drinking, once again, Shipyard Smashed Pumpkin that I had the other day on Sunday. And now drinking it out of our brand new, shiny Civil War Breakfast Club mugs. Oh,
Yes.
my God. Can you believe we got mugs?
This is courtesy of Darren. It just arrived today. So pretty awesome.
Now it's official. Now it's officially a podcast because we got mugs.
Yeah, we've got merch.
Yeah, definitely.
I am drinking Moonlight on Chrome Session IPA.
Call.
Team OO.
Team OO, absolutely. I got a feeling we'll be talking about O.O. Howard at some point tonight.
I think he might come up in this episode or our next episode as well.
Yeah, I think he's gonna be a guest star tonight. Tonight is a very exciting podcast. You know why?
Because we are doing this in 2 parts.
This is our first two-parter, first double-header podcast that we are going to attempt here at the Cape Cod Civil War Breakfast Club. This is why I'm working too much. I got a Cape Cod Breakfast Club World Headquarters. I fucked that up. God. Anyway. Cut, take 2. But anyway, this is our first two-parter. We are going to discuss the Maryland campaign, and then next week we're going to discuss Antietam. So Maryland, dear mother, burst the tyrant's chain. Maryland, my Maryland. You know what's the only state song that talks about secession? That's the whole point of it. 1861, Maryland, my Maryland. Virginia shall not call in vain. Maryland, my Maryland. It's sung out to that Christmas tree song.
I knew that, but I didn't know the lyric.
It refers to bursting the tyrant's chain. You know who the tyrant is?
Lincoln, right?
Lincoln. You got it. Written in 1861. The state song of Baltimore, Maryland. Well, Maryland. I think Baltimore. So we're going to basically start where we kind of left off 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago when we finished with Manassas.
Yeah.
So let's go into our... 3 weeks ago, losing time. So let's go into our Wayback Machine and talk about where we left off after Manassas. John Pope had just got his ass kicked, set it right this time. He got by Lee and Longstreet, and he basically was forced to retreat back to Washington, D.C. It really set the stage for the Maryland campaign because now Lee felt emboldened to keep on going. But it really caused a lot of issues within the Northern Army, really right from the beginning. And that's where we kind of left off. So you're talking about the 2-week-long campaign, the Maryland campaign. You're talking about South Mountain, which we'll talk about. You talk about Harper's Ferry, which we'll talk about, and that leads into Antietam, which we will tease and talk about next week. So what did we learn about Pope, and what did we learn about the status of the Northern Army? Because it wasn't the Army of the Potomac in full yet at that point.
It's the Army of Virginia that Pope was fighting with at Second Manassas.
Right.
And it was a complete rout for the Union Army. Lincoln is basically in a very tough spot right now because 1862 is a congressional election year. Morale is so bad in the Army. If he keeps Pope in, he's going to have a mutiny on his hands. So he's got a very tough decision to make.
So he knows he wants Pope out. He also knows he's got a cabinet that wants no part of George McClellan. Yep. None. He's in a tough situation. So let's just look at old George McClellan here for a second and go back to him once again, dissect and analyze George McClellan. Yeah. So basically he is put in the doghouse after they finish the peninsula in the 7 days, and he is stewing because he's sitting back in D.C., that he's not in charge. He writes his letter to his wife, basically saying that he kind of hopes he loses. He also writes a letter after Manassas, basically like saying Abraham Lincoln stating, let Pope get out of this scrape. Yeah. Which pissed Lincoln off, and that causes all kinds of problems. And what ultimately happens is you got McClellan, who is really the only real choice at the time to take over. Yeah. Meanwhile, this is the McClellan who is saying things like, Lincoln is an idiot. He's the original guerrilla. He's a well-meaning baboon.
He's got names for all his cabinet members, like, Seward's Seward's a puppy, and Wells is like a garrulous old woman.
He hated everybody. This guy is like a golden girl. I mean, he doesn't like anybody. He hates Stanton. He hates Halleck. He even hates Gideon Wells. Who the hell hates Gideon Wells?
I know. Gideon Wells is awesome.
He doesn't like the Secretary of War. He hates the General-in-Chief, hates the head of the Navy. And I think the biggest issue is when you look at McClellan, you see a pattern with him. He just doesn't like authority. to the point where he's going to run for president a couple of years later because he doesn't like, that's his whole thing. He doesn't like authority. So basically, you've got an army whose morale completely sucks. You've got a cabinet that hates McClellan. You've got a president who can't trust Pope anymore. He knows he has to make a tough decision. Meanwhile, Lee is sitting back with this Dr. Evil look back in his headquarters thinking, this is my opportunity perhaps to do something.
Does he have a cat?
He's got 1 million soldiers ready to go.
Does he have one of those ugly cats?
He's got one of his ugly cats. And don't make fun of Butler here. I know that's where you're going with
No,
this.
I'm not making fun of Butler. I'm talking about those hairless cats. Mr. Bigglesworth was hairless.
Mr. Bigglesworth. Lee and Mr. Bigglesworth are sitting around at the campfire outside in Maryland, claiming the next move.
Butler's cute.
Well, Butler's a good cat. He's my cat. He's the Floof Commander, Brigade Commander.
Floofy Brigade Commander.
Floofy, that's what you ever call him. All right. So, so basically everything goes bad at Second Manassas. Everything falls apart. Halleck is the one who reaches out to McClellan first. He goes behind Lincoln's back and says, hey, listen, maybe you might want to come back. I don't know, which is kind of strange because they weren't really fans of each other anyway. McClellan says, well, maybe I'll do it, but I'm going to need some things. I don't really know. But I think when you look at the overall status of that army, it's a complete disarray. You got pissed off troops. You've got all kinds of stuff too. You've got lack of food. You've got lack of supplies. Quartermaster, McClellan had no idea what the damn quartermaster, Pope had no idea what the quartermaster was. You had all kinds of supply line problems. So that brings us to that cabinet meeting on September 2nd, 1862.
Yeah.
When they decide, Stanton primarily, that they want to permanently get rid of George McClellan. He's being a pain in the ass. He's just lingering around. He's sticking around, and they want to get rid of him. So they sit down, and Lincoln, not only does he not want to get rid of McClellan, he says, you know what we're going to do? We're going to keep McClellan. We're going to put him in charge of the defenses of Washington. And Stanton, he probably dropped his monocle. He was probably so mad because he was pissed. You don't want to piss off Stanton. You don't want to piss him off, right?
No.
So he gets completely irate, but Lincoln gets his way. He puts him in charge of the defenses in Washington, D.C.
Yeah, and Lincoln does make a good argument. He says to Stanton, we have to use the tools we have.
He does.
And that, to Lincoln, that was all they had.
They had nothing. They really didn't have anything.
But Lincoln's also doing it because he knows that McClellan can raise the spirits of the army.
Yeah, and that'll be coming. So he knows, okay, let's get this guy back in. Let's see what happens. But then what happens is Lee ends up turning their hand because on 9/4, just 2 days later, he begins his invasion of Maryland.
Yep.
So now Lincoln is like, well, shit, now I need a field commander. I guess we got to go to Mac, right? And that's what happens. So McClellan, after Robert E. Lee decides to march in Maryland, this is causing a crisis now because now Lincoln has no choice but to bring McClellan back as field commander. Okay, it was offered to Burnside first. In full disclosure, Burnside said not it. Probably touched his nose and said not it. Okay. And he actually suggested they hire McClellan because of the morale for the army.
That'll come back to bite Burnside.
It certainly will, just a few weeks later. So on 9/5, just 1 day later, the whole band's back together again. Mac is back. So he's in charge of the army. And his first thing to do is help get the army together. So right off the bat, you've got Lee invading Maryland, and you've got a really bad military atmosphere. You've got a real bad political atmosphere. So you've got everybody hating each other. Everybody. You got the politicians hating the army hating the politicians. The only people who are probably happy with it is going to be some of the soldiers, because that's one thing McClellan does do right is he comes back and he helps restructure again and fix Pope's mess. Pope's mess.
And that's what Lincoln saw in him. And Lincoln at the time was still willing, I think, to give him a chance. Lincoln said that, again, we got to use the tools we have. But he also said if he, meaning McClellan, can't fight himself, he excels in making others ready to fight. So he's basically seeing as having to build this Army of the Potomac from the ground up, because from that, like, the Army of Potomac gets made out of the Army of Virginia, too. Those corps that were with the Army of Virginia get put into the Army of the Potomac.
Well, we'll talk about the Army, because now people have this assumption that when Mac takes over again, he's taken over some powerhouse. Like, now he's back. It was really three armies. You had the Army of the Potomac, which was basically the 2nd, 4th, 5th, and 6th Corps. Yep. Right. You had the former Army of Virginia, which was the 1st and the 12th Corps. And then you had that 9th Expeditionary North Carolina thing that Burnside had, which is part of the 9th Corps. So you really had all completely different armies, completely different goals. But then they also, right as this campaign's going, they're short on guys. they end up bringing in about 19,000 raw recruits that they bring right into the Army. Now, these guys join the Army with zero training. They don't go to camp. They don't go anywhere. They get put right into the field. The beginning of the Maryland campaign starts with 84,000 soldiers. That's what the Union Army is going to have, this culmination of these 3 real armies, or really 2.5 armies, of which, let's see your math skills here. Take out 18,000 people. You're talking about what, about 60,000 field-ready troops? Right? 66,000?
Sure.
Mary McClellan math, right? So you're looking at you're looking at an army which has very bad morale, led by a president and a cabinet who don't get along now. Mm-hmm. And now you have these 3 armies, this conglomeration of armies all put together to basically try and cobble together something in the midst of a crisis with Lee invading Maryland, right?
Yeah.
So how do you think that's going to turn out?
Obviously, the morale is going to go up because McClellan's back, but it's McClellan and Lee's in Maryland, and there's congressional elections. It's got the word clusterfuck written all over it.
That's what I was going to do.
Yeah.
That's what I was going to say. But you think about it, you mentioned just the status of it. So Army of the Potomac has basically 2 wings in reserve, and right wings is led by your hero and mine, Ambrose Burnside, who was a friend of Mac.
Yeah. Weren't he and Mac roommates at?
They referred to themselves as Mac and Burn.
Yep. Oh, that's
sounds like a bad Pickett's buffet menu item right there.
It does actually, or I don't know, some kind of disease.
But just 2 weeks later, they won't be speaking to each other again.
Yep.
That's how the whole thing's going to go.
There will be a bridge between them.
A bridge over troubled waters?
Yep.
Song stuck in my head now. So Army Command, okay, so we mentioned 84,000 people in this new hybrid McClellan Army of the Potomac. So we'll take a look at the corps he had. First Corps, led by Joe Hooker.
Yes.
Who was not a big fan of his, but he could fight. He was an offensive guy. Just to keep things a little bit on the Gettysburgish side, some of the guys under him, he had George Meade, who was a brigade commander. He also had Abner Doubleday. So you can see the formation of what will become later.
Yeah.
Okay. Second Corps is led by Edwin Sumner. He will have Israel Richardson with him, who in his division, who will also have Caldwell from Gettysburg, Thomas Marr, and John Rutter Brooke. So you can start to see these familiar names we get into this 1862. Second Division led by John Sedgwick, who is led by under him would be
Oliver Otis Howard.
Yeah. The Crescent Moon himself. The Crescent Moon and beer can himself.
Team OO.
Team OO will be the second in command under John Sedgwick. No one knows if any elephants were hurt in the filming of this movie.
Oh,
too soon. Too soon. Third Division by William French, we'll hear about later on. And then it goes right to the Fifth Corps with former pariah Fitz-John Porter.
Yep.
Who at the time was facing a court-martial for what he did at Second Manassas.
Yep, and under him is George Sykes,
Morrell.
And potty mouth of the Army of the Potomac, Andrew Humphrey.
You know who was a brigade commander under Morrell was James Barnes.
Ooh.
Yeah, how's that for trivia, huh?
Yeah, wow.
A little trivia here on a Tuesday night. Nice. Oh, I'm sorry, a Saturday morning,
We're drinking in a bar.
Boy, it's really dark on a Saturday morning here, isn't it? It's pitch black out here. Sixth Corps led by William Franklin, who we'll hear about when we talk a little bit later on about South Mountain.
Yep, and he's got Slocum under him.
He's got Slocum if you got him.
Baldy Smith.
He's got Baldy Smith.
Both of them are eventually going to go to the Western Theater.
You know who was a brigade general under Baldy Smith in this corps, in this division? Winfield Scott Hancock.
Oh, okay.
He will take over, just to jump ahead until next week, he will take over for Israel Richardson once he gets hurt at the Sunken Road. Mm-hmm. So it must have been really soaked that day at the Sunken Road for him to take over there.
Yeah.
And we'll tell that cool story about him next week. Romaine Ayers was also part of the artillery, believe it or not, of the Sixth Corps. Ninth Corps led by Jesse Reno, who would have a tough battle at South Mountain. We'll talk about that. Ambrose Burnside will eventually take over with his portion of those North Carolina expeditionaries that we talked about. Finally, the 12th Corps with Joseph Marshall, who would also fall to Alpheus Williams. He also had Sam Wiley Crawford and George Sears Green in his corps as well. Mm. So you look at the makeup of this army. So you've got a strong set of generals. You've got a strong set of colonels. You've got a really good, on paper, quasi-all-star team. But again, when you look deeper at these armies, none of these guys got along.
No.
There was too many moving pieces with this.
Yeah. Well, the later superstars are lower down at this point, right? Like Meade is commanding a division at this point.
Not to mention your Moon Boy.
Yep. OO is commanding a division. Mm-hmm. But yeah, there's like a lot of future superstars here.
And there were at Manassas too. Second Manassas, actually.
Yep. Yeah, they were.
A lot of these same guys. You know, Confederacy was set up a little bit different than we come to know before.
Yep.
Basically, you had Stonewall Jackson, and you had James Longstreet. So looking at the people he had under him, you had Richard Ewell commanding one part of it. You had D.H. Hill. Obviously, you had Jeb Stuart in the cavalry and Pendleton in the artillery. Then over to Longstreet, you had Lafayette McLaws, Richard Anderson, David Jones, John Bell Hood, John Walker, who we will hear about later on, and just basically a lot of different guys. But when you look at actually in Robert E. Lee's army, though, he was basically having a lot of the same issues that the Northern Army had as far as organization skills. When he was going through Maryland, he had a gigantic issue with people walking on him. The biggest issue that they ran into by far in his army was people leaving the army. And so you look at some of the attrition rates that they had as well. Certainly something to keep an eye on as you go forward with this as well. But we got to give a little bit of credit to McClellan, though, unfortunately, with some of this stuff, because he really kind of did some good things.
He was good at organizing. He had this thing with, first of all, not wanting to fail, which we've discussed about in previous episodes. It's very different from Grant and Sherman that had experienced failures in their life, and they just kind of went for it. The other thing, too, to remember with McClellan is he is a Democrat. He just wants peace. So that's something, too, to consider with him as to why he's not really that aggressive.
Well, look what he does. Look what he does, though. In all seriousness, he reorganizes the artillery.
Yep.
He puts Henry Hunt in charge of the artillery. So basically, pretty smart decision. He basically puts him in charge of that, gives him tactical authority, which will come back and have an issue with Gettysburg a year later with Hancock. But he basically refits the entire thing. Each corps is going to have 4 batteries attached, 3 regulars and 3 volunteers and 1 regular on paper anyway. So by the time you get to Antietam, he's got 320 or so organized guns ready to go with this. But the problem was they had the better firepower and they had the better guns, but they didn't have the best guys. Like the Confederates, like we talked about Sunken Road a few minutes ago. When you talk about that again, they only had 1 Federal battery that was really working. The Confederates had a whole bunch of better weaponry that they could use. And so but he did a good job. But another thing he really did well, we talked before about the issue with the supply trains leaving Manassas. And as far as the guys didn't have any food, they didn't have any forage for the horses. He brought in a guy named Rufus Ingalls, who made him the chief quartermaster. He was so good in that position, he stayed chief quartermaster right through Appomattox. Wow. He kept the job the whole war. He basically made sure these guys were fed. They made sure they had enemies. And more importantly, and this is a big thing that doesn't really get publicized, because he really focused on making sure these guys were fed, they didn't have to pillage and forage Maryland. Because Maryland at the time, like that song that we sang a little bit earlier, and we're going to hear you sing here in a few minutes, I assume.
No, people do not.
We love hearing you sing. Oh, no, you should hear Mary sing.
No, people do not need to hear me sing.
It's quite a thing. But regardless, he keeps them from going through and really pissing off the locals in Maryland to help basically keep them in the Union too. Because if you start going through there and ripping up farms and pulling a Sherman special in Maryland, potentially there could be a big situation. So the Ingalls thing is a huge, huge thing that most people have never heard of. Was he really helped stabilize those supplies and he really kept that under control. And I think that's something that he doesn't really get enough credit for with McClellan.
Yeah, well, I think as much as we kind of shit all over McClellan because he's kind of easy to, let's face it, it's easy to do that to him. He made the Army of the Potomac.
He did. He really did. He had issues with authority. He certainly did. He had issues with Lincoln. He had issues with Halleck. He had issues with you and me. Everybody. He hated everybody. I don't know what I did. I know I'm sure he can piss you.
I don't think his wife was like his number one confidant. I think like I have a book of their letters and like the shit he writes to her. I mean, he didn't think anybody else was going to read it, but he wrote to her after he was basically brought out of his time out. And he said, again, I have been called upon to save the country. Under the circumstances, no one else could save the country.
Absolutely.
Like, that's what he thought of himself.
Don't you need that, though, if you're in that role? Don't you need to have confidence? I mean, it was more fake confidence, but don't you, if you're a guy going into battle, okay, do you want to follow a guy who is kind of chicken shit a little bit, like a Ledley, or do you want to follow a guy who's going to be full of himself and bravado?
I think McClellan came across as confident to his troops, and he's coming across as arrogant in his letters to his wife. So I think there's something a bit different going on there. So I do see what you're saying. Like, yeah, I would want to. I probably would if I was a soldier. Probably be like, yeah, I'm following McClellan.
There was digressing. There was a story about Gettysburg I read. It was one of the diaries. We were talking about bravado and bravery and all that stuff. And a soldier writes home and he says, oh, we were fighting in a cemetery, artillery flying everywhere. And I guess the mother or the wife wrote back to him, oh, I hope you weren't hiding behind the gravestones. I hope you were being brave. And he responded back, we didn't hide behind the gravestones. That's where all the generals were hiding. It was a great, I forget what book that's in. I got to find that, but it was a good one. But McClellan did organize. He did have them ready. Conversely, Lee's army was not without their issues too. We mentioned the straggling. So he shows up in the Maryland campaign, and right off the bat, he starts cutting. They talk about not enough soldiers and all this stuff. He basically says, here's the deal. If you don't have shoes, you ain't coming. You're going to stay back. If you're sick, you ain't coming. You're going to stay back. So when he left, he sent 5,000 shoeless, sick soldiers, left them in Winchester because he didn't want them coming on the campaign. So right off the bat, he's down at probably 63,000 or so. And when you look at the early part of the campaign, we'll talk about, he lost another few thousand at South Mountain and Harper's Ferry. So he's going to go into Antietam with 63,000 soldiers on paper. Now, okay, that sounds pretty good, but over 20 to 25,000 people between when they left and when they got to Antietam got sick. So he's out of 40,000 battle-ready people when they get to September 7th, starting at 70,000. I mean, how many did they lose at South Mount Harper's Ferry? 3,000? It wasn't that many.
The casualties were not that high there.
So let's just give him 5,000 casualties. He leaves with 70,000 guys. He goes into Antietam with 40,000 people with no big battles in between. So right off the bat, you can see and a lot of the problem they had was stragglers. They were losing people left and right. He ended up taking his army over to Hagerstown, Maryland, which has got a really good bar I went to a few months ago called Bear and Bulls. Yeah. I forget the name of it, but it's right in the main drag there. It's pretty good. But Lee and Longstreet end up going there, and the rest of the army kind of fans out a little bit. So this is a part of the show when we begin to talk about what happens in Harper's Ferry.
Do you want to talk a little bit about why Lee's invading Maryland, though?
Go right ahead. Okay. Be my guest.
All right. Not to steal your thunder or anything.
No, I've been talking too much.
Okay, so Lee...
I'm just waiting for you to start singing.
I'm not singing on this podcast. I haven't had enough booze yet. Save
God.
That for a karaoke bar at some point in the road trip.
It'll be the Breakfast Club After Dark 5.5 edition.
So Lee is going to invade Maryland for a few different reasons. First of all, is to feed his army, because he knows the farms in Maryland are going to be rich with crops at that time, and they've been untouched by war, unlike Virginia. So that's one reason. The other is the Northern morale. Lee knows what's going on with the AOP blusterfuck after Manassas Army of Virginia with John Pope and all that.
There's another E next to our broadcast now after that swear.
It's always going to be explicit. Lee felt that he could win the war, not just through battles, but just by making people of the North unwilling to fight. And he's doing this because the congressional elections are happening. And Lee thought he could just kind of fuck with their minds by invading them and make them, want to be like, we don't want to do this war thing anymore because they're too close to home now. And he tells Jefferson Davis on September the 3rd that the enemy was much weakened and demoralized. And also a victory on Northern soil is going to figure prominently in the Confederacy getting recognized as a legit nation instead of the fake news that it actually was.
It certainly was. I think Lee knows what's going on. I mean, he's reading the Northern papers. He sees what's going on. He sees the infighting and the instability with the Northern Army. Exactly. He wants to fight McClellan now. He wants to fight them and he wants to take the field before they're ready. He knows how disorganized they are. Lee always wanted to keep that initiative. He wanted to fight the battles, take the initiative. And to your point, Mary, he wanted to keep the pressure on this election. Yep. I mean, there's that whole thing with the European intervention, all that stuff, but Lee knew that wasn't going to happen. He just knew it wasn't going to happen. It again goes back to the will versus the might, and he knew that anything he does on the Northern soil is going to help with that 64 election. But he's got an opportunity now to fight McClellan when he knows he's not ready. He knows the army's a mess, and he's got him.
So now on to Harper's Ferry?
Harper's Ferry. So, I mean, basically, the Union garrisons are Harper's Ferry and at Martinsburg. So Lee goes into Maryland completely with the assumption that the Union Army is going to vacate Harper's Ferry. He does not want Harper's Ferry in his tailwind because he doesn't want a 12,000, 15,000 man army behind him as he goes forward. So he's like, well, let's go to Harper's Ferry, which is a very, very cool place, by the way, Harper's Ferry. Good restaurants there.
I've never been before.
Really? I knew that. Yeah. We'll get through a field trip.
Planning on going as soon as the borders open.
As soon as the borders open. Hopefully it won't be too long. But he basically he's amazed that they don't go. He can't believe that they're still there. Halleck wanted to keep Harper's Ferry manned. He felt that was an important garrison to have. Basically, Lee thought the federal soldiers were going to leave and they were going to vacate, go to Pennsylvania, defend Pennsylvania. That's what he always did. So he was surprised that Harper's Ferry, Virginia, because it wasn't West Virginia back then, was still going to be manned. And so that's going to be a problem. So what he's going to do, he's going to send 3 columns to go and surround Harper's Ferry to get them to basically quit. Yep. And he's going to send a 4th column to Boonesboro because he's thinking, not only after I kick these guys' asses, they're going to take off, I'm going to pick them off right where they have to go out. So he basically sends a troop to intercept those guys leaving. And on paper, it looks like it's going to work as far as the whole thing goes. But as the whole thing goes on, easier said than done, because you're talking about marching guys through those mountains, over those rivers, and with really no supply lines. He has Stonewall Jackson basically be the headliner to do it. Jackson was, as soon as the South seceded, right in April of 1861, that was Jackson's first assignment, was Harper's Ferry. So he knew it. So they wanted to send Jackson into Harper's Ferry to basically be the guy. So he's one of 3 columns who goes in there to take over the heights. And so basically 3 columns, they're going to basically try to surround the heights with Bolivar Heights, Maryland Heights, and Loudon Heights.
And it's McLaws and Walkers that are accompanying him on that.
Yep.
And D.H. Hill is playing the rear guard. He's going to stay back in the South Mountain range.
You're going to have Jackson approaching from the west. You're going to have McLaws going to take Maryland Heights to the north. And you're going to have John A. Walker take Loudon Heights from the south. The plan is to trap them, to basically surround them, force them to retire. They have a problem, though, because once they get up there, you can't march soldiers across those 2, the Shenandoah, and you can't march them across the Potomac. They're too busy. You can't ford them. So small arms fire is not going to make it across those mountains. So they have to basically use artillery. And this is basically what happens. So Jackson sets up those batteries, and he pounds them and pounds them and pounds them. You're embarrassing the children.
If this is an explicit podcast, I'm not watching.
Anyways, there's a guy named Colonel Dixon Miles who basically vows the Union guy to defend Harper's Ferry. He's going to basically defend to the last man. He tells his subordinates, anybody you see who tries to run away, retreat, you were to shoot him on sight. That's what the plan is. He thinks he can hold on to them because he doesn't think the infantry can get across the rivers. But those batteries, what ultimately does him in. September 14th, he continues to cannonade them from 3 different directions for 5 hours with 50 guns. Finally, the next morning on 9/15, September 15th, which is today's date.
Yep.
So 150 years ago today, well, that's actually 8 o'clock this morning, was the date that Dixon Miles surrendered Harper's Ferry, the largest surrender in the Civil War.
Yep.
12,700 guys surrender. The scapegoat in the entire thing that you hear about later is the 125th New York, led by George Lamb Willard. And you know what they called his regiment after they surrendered? He had new troops, the 125th New York. As soon as the artillery came, they all ran and hid. And they all got captured, including Willard. He got captured too, along with Miles. He got captured. But from that point on, Willard's 125th New York and Willard himself was called the Harper's Ferry Cowards.
Oh, ouch.
That was the nickname they got. Just to jump ahead real quick, it was a big reason why Willard did what he did at Gettysburg, was because he wanted to help redeem himself when he fought against Cabot Wilcox out with the first Minnesota areas.
Yep.
Across the Pennsylvania Memorial. He gets killed at Gettysburg. That was the day they said that he retired the name Harper's Ferry Cowards. But that was the nickname they carried from when they got paroled after Antietam, when they got sent back. So that was a stigma that they had. So again, you see this infighting in the Union Army.
Yeah.
And cowards, I mean, that's back then that was big fight word. That's like
Flying Dutchman, right?
Flying Dutchman, exactly. And then it's like calling someone back in the future yellow.
Yellow.
You don't do it. You just don't do it. Can you call me yellow?
Are you yeller?
Yeah. You chicken?
And what is it in the part 2? The guy hits that thing on his vest and it's like, bark, 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 bark.
McFly.
I have those movies all memorized.
McFly would have been in the Irish Brigade, probably.
Probably, yeah.
So Harper's Ferry ends up being a big deal because Lee, at that point, we're going to digress a little bit and go back a little bit times. At the time, the Union Army was getting their shit together, because what did they find on September 13th?
Order 191.
Order 191, which basically explained all of this. The key point of this entire campaign was Harper's Ferry. Without Harper's Ferry, Lee was like, we got to go. We're done. It took 3 days for Jackson to finally take Harper's Ferry. In the meantime, they find the battle plans, and McClellan, which leads to South Mountain, we'll get to here in a few minutes. Basically, Lee knows the army of the of the Potomac knows his plan now. He knows that the campaign's over. She told his generals, this is done. This shit's over. We got to get out of here. And it wasn't until Jackson took Harper's Ferry that he changed his plan. The plan was to go back and build a defensive situation, fight the Union, and try to escape back to the Potomac. Tells his soldiers, tells McLaws, just get your ass back. Whether you go through Shepherdstown, you got to get over the Potomac, and we got to get back to Virginia. But once Harper's Ferry fell, he decided to reform the army again, regroup the entire army, and bring them to Sharpsburg because they have those heights, they have the creek, and build a defensive battle there and wait for the Union to come attack him, which is what Antietam is. But certainly after 191 it gets found, it does lead to an offensive that's going to go to the Battle of South Mountain. But again, the delay is what ultimately doomed this.
Yeah, McClellan sits on it over 16 fucking hours. He sits on it.
And there's been a lot of questions about why he sat on it, what the delay was.
Yeah, because he seems so confident because Gibbon goes to see him the day he's found it. Mm-hmm. He and McClellan and Gibbon are friends. And Gibbon at the time is commanding the Black Hat Brigade. That's their name at the time, is the Black Hat Brigade. They're a brigade of Westerners. They are the 2nd, 6th, 7th Wisconsin, 19th Indiana. The 24th Michigan is not yet with them.
When you get a job done right, you get Michigan.
Yeah.
Right, Ohio State?
Apparently. When Gibbon goes to see him, McClellan is all, oh, I've found this, I got this. And he does say at one point, with this order, I can whip Bobby Lee. So he is very confident about it, yet he sits on it.
Why do you think he sat on it? Based on McClellan's position, you just got a promotion. You're in charge, you're McClellan now, and you get this. What do you do?
I think he did what McClellan would do in any situation. I think he probably started thinking about it. He found it, had that excitement, and was like, what do we do? What do we do? If I go after them and I fail, if this is not an actual order, I think there was a little bit of just not wanting to risk it at that point. But then the more people he told, the more people were like, we need to move on this. What do you think? I think
you're right. I think there's a lot of it. I don't know. See, part of me thinks he thought it was too good. Think about it. You're sitting there and some dude runs up to you with 3 cigars, which I would have kept the cigars. I'm not going to lie. I would have kept the cigars. Okay.
Oh, me too.
And he says, I found this. I found the game plan of Robert E. Lee specified out blah X, Y, Z. If I got that, I'd be like, this is a setup. It has to be. There is no way anybody is that lucky to find the literal game plan of a campaign and you find out they're all spread out, where they are, where they're going. I'd be like, bullshit. This has got to be a setup. I think he waited, and this is just me. This is not anything. This is not any books, nothing. I think he thought he was being set up. Just me personally. I just think he thought it just can't be this easy. It just can't be. But yeah, unfortunately for him, it turned out that it was that easy. He could have changed a lot of history if he had just simply maybe believed in himself a little bit there.
Yeah, to your point, I think you are right about that.
Wow, right again.
Yeah, you're right again. Look at that, Weeks. Look at you go. Yeah.
Love being right. It happens so frequently.
I think it ties into that and just his excitement at finding it, but then it's like, oh shit, what do I do now? But then people find out about it because he's excited. He's openly telling Gibbon about it. Please don't die on the podcast, Aaron.
I told you if I die, I want killed at Gettysburg on my gravestone. I told you.
Okay, well, yeah, that could happen.
It probably is going to happen.
Anyway, he's found this order and he just doesn't act on it. I mean, McClellan gets pretty heavily criticized about it. I mean, and I think some of it is right, but there must have been something going on in his head that he's not acting on it, I mean, as you always say, though, we are 157 years, removed from this. We don't know what they're thinking at the time. We can look back and think oh yeah, if we found it, we would have moved. But
I think, though, he never explains why, and so we'll never know.
Exactly.
We don't know Sickles. He'll never accept blame for what he did at Gettysburg. And we talk about that, but he'll never sit there and say, I think I did anything wrong. And McClellan, I think, was the same way, but it had to have been something because he had all the right people in charge as far as what he wanted to do. He had a little bit better morale, and he had Lee over a barrel, and he really let him off the hook to the point where he let him off the mat. But I always wonder what a Joe Hooker would have done in that situation.
I think he would have pursued.
I mean, we know what a Sherman would have done.
Oh, yeah, he would have went after him.
I mean, Sherman wasn't Sherman in 62, but 1864 Sherman would have, or Grant or someone like that. But it's really one that got away because especially when you see the fact that Lee had capitulated this campaign. He basically was telling his guys, we're done, we're out of here. This is we got checkmated on this one. Although it takes a little while for McClellan, it takes a whole day for him to do something, he does actually go on the offensive. And that's the Battle of South Mountain.
He does.
Right?
Yep, South Mountain. A battle that doesn't get talked about much at all. I actually have a Mort Kunstler calendar. That battle is not listed on there in September 14th, but Jackson taking Harper's Ferry is, and so is the Battle of Antietam. Same with Chickamauga starting on September 19th, which it started on September 18th.
Here we go again.
Hey,
heard this 1,000 times. You're right.
When you learn about what Minty and Wilder do at Chickamauga on September 18th, that is the opening day of the battle. But that is for an episode like 2 weeks from now, so I'm not going to get into my preachy bullshit now.
I bet you we hear all about that in 2 weeks.
Oh yeah, you're going to hear all about them.
Well, what about the South Mountain? What about this aggressive McClellan?
So he goes on the offensive with this. He's pursuing Lee. He will go to South Mountain, and that's where there's going to be obviously the Battle of South Mountain. And there's 3 separate gaps that he's going to be attacking at: Fox's, Turner's, and Crampton's. So at Fox's Gap, you have General Reno, probably butchering his name like I do, the state of Massachusetts.
Oh, that was close.
Eventually.
That was as close as you've ever been.
Eventually. I probably actually have to be there to say it properly.
Okay. That was a good one, though, Fincher. Well done.
Thanks. And Crampton's Gap, you have General Franklin fighting. But at Turner's Gap, you have Hooker's First Corps. Am I getting that right?
Hooker was the first. Corps.
Okay, good. I was like, oh my God, am I wrong? But their fighting is the Iron Brigade. Mm-hmm. Or, well, actually, just gave it away. The Black Hat Brigade is fighting there, and they're going to be...
The importance of South Mountain, obviously, is this is McClellan being aggressive, and he has to get through these passes to pursue Lee's retreating army, this divided army. So this is his opportunity. But yes, I'm sorry to interrupt. So you were saying about the Black Hats?
Sorry, you didn't interrupt me.
What was it about Chickamauga you said again? Oh, wow. I bet even the audio could see that middle finger you just gave me.
Yeah, the verb. The Black...
I'm going to bork my heart.
Yep. Oh. Gibbon's Black Hat Brigade is going to attack at Turner's Gap, and they're going to be going against D.H. Hill. Which little piece of trivia about Gibbon and D.H. Hill: Gibbon is going to be attacking the man that he stood up as groomsman at his wedding.
A little tidbit.
Yeah.
You know? I wonder if they talked about that, like, afterwards.
I don't know. Probably not. D.H. Hill was a bastard.
He was. Didn't he catch Meade early in the war? Meade was sleeping under a tree. And
no, that was Reynolds, I think. Wasn't that
Reynolds? That's what it was.
Yeah.
Reynolds. I'm sorry. It was,
Reynolds.
I don't know why I blanked on that. I thought it was...
And he was like, oh, this is how war goes. And Reynolds probably went like that to him.
Give him the finger?
Yeah. Probably burbed him.
The game of James Archer at Herb Swift's middle finger.
Yeah.
It's good to see you, General. It's not good to see you.
So the Black Hat Brigade had fought at 2nd Manassas, and they were at the Bronner Farm, and they had suffered very heavy casualties there. So a few days prior to the Battle of South Mountain, Gibbon had met with McClellan, as I said before. Like, that's when McClellan told him about Order 191. But the reason Gibbon was going there was to ask McClellan that he would like another regiment to be part of this brigade, and he requested another Western regiment. This regiment will eventually be the 24th Michigan, but he's not going to have them for the Battle of South Mountain. So at Turner's Gap, the fighting is obviously they're going up a gap in the mountains, so they're climbing up terrain. And D.H. Hill's men, although D.H. Hill has way less men than what Gibbon is bringing up with him, they are entrenched behind walls, fences. They're basically in a very defensible position. But the Black Hat Brigade just keeps going. And they keep going and going and going. And Gibbon is on his horse, and he's just like, he's up there and he's like, just keep going forward, forward, forward. And they keep going up the hill. And at one point, the men in the 7th Wisconsin are out of arms, including taking them from those who had fallen already. Gibbon's orders to them are eerily similar to an order that would be given at Gettysburg. Bayonets. That's the point that they got to.
And what's funny about that attack was, what's the only thing that ultimately made him fall was that night came again.
Yep, right?
So
Exactly.
So basically, the held the high ground, but the Rebs still held the gaps because it got too dark.
Yeah.
So it's so funny how parallels a lot of these battles would be when and of course the nickname that McClellan would go ahead and give these guys.
Yes, like Hooker and McClellan can see them fighting, and McClellan says, wow, they fought like in Hooker says, those are my men. And McClellan said, wow, they fought like iron. And from then on, they were known as the Iron Brigade.
Yeah, well deserved.
Yeah.
Well deserved.
So very, very cool story about them fighting there. But then there's fighting going on at other parts too, at Fox's Gap as well as Crampton's Gap. And at, where is it, Reno gets killed?
He gets fought at Fox's Gap. So Reno is going up against AP Hill. Okay. And, and this is when our old friends, the Kanawha Division, remember them from a few weeks ago?
Yeah, which Rutherford B. Hayes is part of.
He gets not mortally wounded, seriously injured in this battle. Again, how history could have changed, a future president being killed. But so Brigadier General Jacob Cox, he drives and basically he's holding the land south of the Gap. He pushes the North Carolinas basically until they're as far as he can, until his guys get completely exhausted. Basically, the Rebs deploy at a place called Wise Farm. Reno tries to push again, but John Bell Hood, who we've talked about before, he ends up showing up. This is where Reno does get killed. And that's pretty much the end of that one. What was interesting, one of the cool stories about this one is this Wise Farm. Is the owner of the Wise Farm, the day after the battle, he finds a bunch of dead Rebs in his yard.
That's right.
So you know what he does with them?
Is this the $1 to bury them or something like this?
$1 to bury, and then he takes 60. He takes the remaining 60 and dumps them down a dry well on his property. He just says, you know what? I don't need the money. He takes 60 bodies and drops them down at the bottom of a dry well. And I assume they're probably still there.
Ew, David.
Yeah. So in case you're looking for well water in the in that area, but that's go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was just saying, so it just goes to show another Union guy is killed in Reno, and then who takes over the night from that would be Ambrose Burnside, who would take over that corps.
Yeah, and then
the Ninth Corps.
And then there's the fighting over at Crampton's Gap, which has some Confederate cavalry, and a portion of General Lafayette McLaw's division is there as well.
They did really with the Confederates. You got to give them props on this one, though. They were severely outmanned on this one.
Oh, they were.
I think McLaw's had less 500 men, 600 men.
Yep.
Going up against Franklin's entire 6th Corps.
Yep. And Franklin spent 3 hours just deploying his forces against him.
Yeah. You had Darius Couch in charge of a division who ultimately would take over defense of the state of Maryland. But they trenched in, and again, this is where you see Slocum, you see Baldy Smith, you see all these guys trying to open that gap. But this is a situation where it's almost like a Culp's Hill in reverse. We mentioned David Ireland last night. We were talking on another thing we were doing. Basically, was it 6-1 odds, something like that, like 3,000 guys against 500. But regardless, what South Mountain Battle will do again is it will give the opportunity for Lee to basically bring his army together again.
Yeah, it hasn't really done and I mean they were outnumbered. The Confederates are outnumbered. Like there's 28,000 Union troops going against 18,000. Like obviously McClellan is holding some of his troops back, which Howard is not involved in this battle at all. He's one of the ones that is held back.
He probably would have made a difference, probably.
I think he would have. He would have been stood up there with his X-Men power and lightning bolts out of his one arm.
He would have just flipped that hair and they would have all been running.
Oh, exactly. Yeah. Stood up there and they would have gone.
Hit him with the power of the half moon.
But the casualties are not, I hate saying low casualties because it's still it's terrible that people had to die here. The Union it suffers 2,325 total casualties, and Confederates is 2,685 casualties at South Mountain.
A lot of those guys are captured. A lot of I think there's about 400 or 500 killed on each side. I think a lot of the guys are captured. But what does this campaign do though? At the end of the day, it creates a missed opportunity for the Union, without a doubt. This is probably one of the few times where Robert E. Lee admits defeat, is ready to actually retreat, and is let off the mat. This could have been a big situation. Obviously, this will lead into our subject for next week, which will be Antietam. But this is Lincoln sitting back, just ready to issue that Emancipation Proclamation. Exactly. He's ready to go with it, but he needs a win. And this could have been it. This could have been it right here. And he could have forced them back over the Potomac, and this probably would have been it. It would have saved the bloodiest day in American history if McClellan had probably attacked a little quicker and pushed them back at the time. If Harper's Ferry was defended a little bit more. I think it's tough, though. I think it's tough to really blame Miles for Harper's Ferry, because that wasn't, if anybody who's been at Harper's Ferry knows, that is an indefensible position.
Like, how many times did it switch hands in the Civil War? Was it like 27 or something?
A whole bunch of times. Go back to John Brown's raid. It's got history of that, but it went back and forth, and it's a strategic point right on the whole thing. But I think it's a defendable position unless you've got artillery. And once they got the guns up there, that was it. It was just raining lead on them. You had no position but to retire. And they, 50 guns for 5 hours. I mean, it wasn't quite Pickett's charge. It was 147 Confederate guns going for 2 hours, but that's still a lot of lead. So you can't really blame them for really going out. But that was pulling the stopper out of the bathtub at that point.
Well, that's when Lincoln said the bottom is out of the tub, referring to this time.
What, is Lincoln stealing my quotes now?
Yeah, he is, totally.
Oh, my gosh. But this was really the beginning of Lee's, opportunities. If they'd have held Harper's Ferry, and you know what, you got to give Halleck a little bit of credit for not pulling them out of there from the beginning, holding their ground, even though it was they didn't really give any soldiers to do it.
Yeah.
And Harper's Ferry would ultimately be what would ultimately doom Joe Hooker a year later, when he wanted those soldiers and they wouldn't pull them out of there, but for their experiences, what happened at the Maryland campaign. Until Meade got in, and they just said, okay, you can have them screw Harper.
Yeah.
So Harper's Ferry is one of those pivotal points. But when you're looking at the flashpoints, and you're looking at what created the Antietam battle and what created this whole thing, it was really Harper's Ferry. Because if Harper's Ferry doesn't fall, Lee's out. They're done.
Exactly. Yeah, that's what it's all hinging on too. And for Lincoln sitting in Washington at this point, which there's a really good book, here I go enabling, called Fierce Glory. It's written by Justin Martin. It's about Antietam, but not only does it talk about Antietam, it does talk about the lead up to it. It talks about the political situation. The author does a really great job at comparing McClellan with Lee to show who's going up against who. It's actually one of the best analysis I've ever seen between the two of them. And he also he goes back and forth between Antietam and Washington. So you have an idea of what's going on with Lincoln, you have an idea what's going on with the battle. But the thing that I loved about Fierce Glory, and the reason I'm talking about it now is just in case people listening to this on Saturday, if they want to go buy the book, because believe me, it's a quick read. It's also an excellent audiobook. I just got mine on Audible and I listened to it. It took me just a couple days to listen to it. The other thing it is too, it does not overwhelm you with a lot of details about the battle. So you're not going to be hearing like this corps was here, this division. I know some people can sometimes get overwhelmed by that, but it tells it from the perspective of the soldiers. I learned so much about the soldiers who were fighting there and their stories. It is one of the best Civil War books out there. I'd read it last year and then I listened to it again and I loved it even more, just because you hear so much of those personal stories. And he tells it in such a way that I was playing out like a movie in my head as I listened to it. But it is a really good telling, not just Antietam, but what was leading up to it and what hinged on the Union winning Antietam, which we're obviously going to talk about next week.
That's a pretty good book. I've got a book for you, though. Same subject. I think this one's better than that. Yeah, I think it is. Okay. And this is a book by Scott Hartwig, who used to be in charge of Gettysburg, a book called To Antietam Creek, the Maryland Campaign of 1862.
That's the one Jen was reading.
Yep. This is a hard book to find, but if you can find this one, it's a very, very fast, easy read, to your point, very detail-oriented. It's not quite a Coddington level of brain freeze, but it's going to give you a lot of good details. It's a great book as far as the lead up. If you're looking for a Battle of Antietam book, the Sears book is the best one.
Yep, Landscape Turn Red.
I don't think anybody would disagree with that.
Oh, yeah.
But I think Fierce Patriot, I think that. But if
you mean Fierce Glory?
Oh, God, it's too many books. You and your books. Fierce Glory, yes. That book or the Hartwig book, you can't go wrong with that. Maybe we can trade books and we can read each other's books and see which one we think is better.
I think we could do that.
I think we can figure something out with that. But either book, you can't go wrong. I like the Hartwig book because it was the first book on the campaign I read, and it's kind of my go-to book as far as trying to understand the campaign. But Fierce Glory is obviously a good book too, and I have not read that one, but I've heard good things.
But it's Fierce Glory is more about Antietam. Your book's more about the lead up to it. So I think they would make good companion books for people to have. And I do know that for, some people have come to me and said, tell me about a book about the Civil War that's not going to overwhelm me with a lot of details about Army stuff, but just, tell me in a way I can understand. Fierce Glory is that book. it's very well written. But Sears too, hands down, is Landscape Turned Red. Definitely another go-to Antietam book as well.
That's probably that's the best book. That's Sears' best book, by the way. Yeah. I think it's better than the Gettysburg book. I think that's by far the best book. It's an easy read as far as that goes. It's a very, if you read that book and you go to Antietam, you'll see exactly what he's talking about, and it makes so much sense. But if you are looking for a pre-book, you want to read between Chantilly and September 17th, the Battle of Antietam, pick up the Harper book. I think you can get it on Amazon, but I think it's expensive because it's kind of rare. It's kind of tough to find. But if you can find it, you should definitely get it because Scott's book is fantastic.
Yeah, I need to get it. Thanks, I've been enabled now.
Yeah. Well, you can just read mine. You can just read mine. For God's sakes, give me that look. So I think that's a good place to leave us off right there. What do you think?
I think so, yeah. So
I think we can tease. So next time we get together, we will talk about what happens next. So we will leave the field. We will leave Lee and his army nestled on the hills of Sharpsburg. Mm-hmm. We will leave the Army of the Potomac in McClellan, east of the city, trying to figure out what to do next, what the best course of action is. And then we will explain in detail the Battle of Antietam, the ramifications politically and militarily that come out of that. And you know what? We might even have some cool stories about some of the generals who fought in this battle. Because this is all about humanizing and all about personifying these people. We got some cool AP Hill stories to talk about at the Battle of Antietam.
Yeah, I've actually got a cool Gibbon one to talk about.
All right, well, I think that's a good place to drop off. So any final thoughts from you, Fincher?
Oh, I think that was an excellent episode with you, as always.
I think it was. Hopefully it wasn't too detail-oriented, but this is all leading up to bigger and better things, and now understanding the players and what the armies were, the status of the armies, the psyche of the armies. Mm-hmm. Now you have what was a down army of Northern Virginia being emboldened again, because now they're going to fight again.
Yeah.
Versus you have the Army of the Potomac, who is still kind of high though, because they had some success in South Mountain. Exactly. They feel that they have the upper hand. So you've got two good armies, two teams on the field ready to go. It really one of the few times in the Civil War history when both armies feel like they have the better army.
Yep. And oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, and they're going to meet in Sharpsburg, Maryland, the right to issue the Emancipation Proclamation.
That's what I was just going to say. Like, that's what is hinging with Lincoln is he's been writing this Emancipation Proclamation for a few months now, and he's waiting for his opportune moment to.
Oh, he's got it in his inbox. He's ready to hit that send button.
He's ready to. It's there. He just needs the opportune time.
You know when you have something, you're going to send it, and you're not sure you want to, and you wait. Yeah. And finally, you say, just screw it and send it. Yep. That's what this was.
Yeah,
that's what
Lincoln's doing. The other thing too that we've done with discussing Second Manassas is we are showing the stepping stones that lead to Antietam. That it's not just Second Manassas and Antietam. Mm-hmm. There's all this stuff that happens in between. There's all this. It's like there's drama going on. There's armies changing, and there's different battles that are happening as well that are stepping stones to what becomes Antietam, the bloodiest day in American history.
And the 17th is coming up. I believe it's Saturday?
No, it's Thursday.
Today's the 15th. That's right. It's Thursday.
Yeah. And
today's only Tuesday. No.
And then in a few weeks, we are going to be spending a couple episodes on Chickamauga.
Do you know the battle actually happened the day before everybody thinks in Chickamauga?
Yep.
Did you know that? I heard that somewhere. So where I heard that. A little Fincher told me.
Start the 18th.
Does this have to do with Minty by any chance? Is this?
I feel like I'm being like some dickhead historian now. It's like start on the 18th, not the 19th.
You just need to have a quality. Actually.
Yeah. No.
you need to put that into your lexicon.
Now I feel bad.
Oh no, no one's feeling bad. No one's feeling bad, except maybe McClellan, but that's okay. All right, so we're going to leave it there. We're going to have a great time. Always a pleasure to talk to you, Mary, and I thought it was a good talk today.
Yeah.
And we'll get back to the second half of this next week. Don't forget, Facebook Live at 10 a.m. on Saturday. We're going back to our regular Saturday schedule.
Yeah.
So tune in, check it in. Mary did a good thing this week. She got this podcast on iTunes.
Yeah.
So now we are no longer on just the Podbean. Now we're on Spotify and iTunes, which is a pretty big deal. And if you want to see our smiling faces, you can see us on YouTube. Oh my God, we're on TV. We can be on YouTube. So you can see some of the past couple episodes we did. And the Facebook Lives are on YouTube too. We call
those
I'm
putting them on the YouTube as well. And I'm also posting them on Podbean as well. So they'll go to all our platforms. So, but they are unedited. So like, I'm not going to sit down and edit those.
No.
Well, it takes me like 7-8 hours to edit these ones here. So
you do a great job with the editing. I got to give you props, Mary.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Anyway, so we will look forward to talking to you soon. So we will turn into Antietam. So hopefully you enjoyed this. Hopefully it was a good lead up, Antietam Eve, as they say, as this goes into September 17th, which we will talk about in detail, which is the bloodiest day in American history. And it's something that we will talk about with complete reverence and understanding what implications it had going forward. So that's it for me.
Yep, and that's it for me. So everybody have when this episode drops, a wonderful Saturday, and hopefully you will tune into our Facebook Live at 10 o'clock. We will talk about this episode, but if the conversation digresses and we talk about other stuff, that's perfect too.
The point of the Facebook Live isn't just to talk about this shit again, it's to interact with people.
Yeah.
And the other day we had a really good one with when we were talking about the football. And it was just really cool to kind of talk with people and just hang out with some of our Civil War nerd friends and just kind of shoot the shit and drink morning beers. So hopefully
we do drink morning beers because we get up ridiculously early on Saturdays. So
yeah, so 6 o'clock in the morning, like 80-year-old people getting up that early.
I admit to being up at 6 o'clock on a Saturday.
Me too.
I set my alarm.
I get up for my coffee. I'm at 6:30
every day. I get up for my coffee too.
But definitely check out the Facebook Live. We'd love to talk to you. Love to hear from you. It's just a lot of fun. We will definitely look forward to seeing you then.
Yep. And as always, you can find us on Twitter, find us on Instagram, and you can also find us on Facebook too. Just if you have any episode ideas, let us know. And you can reach out to us at civilwarbreakfastclub@gmail.com as well, which we have had a few listeners email us there too. So
yeah, we're on Twitter. We're obnoxious on Twitter, so come find us on Twitter.
Yeah. Anyway, so until next week, where we'll leave you, we'll pick it up with Antietam. So everybody have a wonderful Saturday, and we will see you again soon. Bye.
Peace out.
Bye.